Most people don't realize they've spent years building a personality designed to avoid disappointing other people, not to express themselves, not to live honestly, not even to be happy, just to avoid judgment. And the scary part is, it usually looks completely normal from the outside. You become the good person, the reliable friend, the easygoing partner, the responsible employee, the son or daughter who doesn't cause problems, the person who keeps saying yes even when every part of them wants to say no. And after a while, you stop being able to tell the difference between your real personality and the version of yourself built for approval. That's why so many people feel mentally exhausted even when nothing is technically wrong in their life. They're constantly performing, constantly adjusting themselves depending on who's around, constantly monitoring how they're perceived. In this video, we're going to talk about how to stop living for other people, why approval becomes addictive without most people noticing, and the small psychological shifts that actually help you become mentally independent again. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking this starts with confidence. It doesn't. It starts with fear. Because most people aren't living for other people because they're weak. They're doing it because somewhere along the way their brain learned that being accepted was safer than being honest. That's the first thing nobody explains properly. The invisible habit that controls your life. A lot of people think pleasing people is just about being too nice. But that's not really what's happening. Most of the time, it's actually a constant emotional scanning process. You walk into a room and automatically start reading reactions. Did they like what I said? Did that sound awkward? Was that too much? Should I act more chill? Should I say what I actually think? Should I stay quiet? Did they seem annoyed? Do they still like me? And what's dangerous is how automatic this becomes. You can do it for years without realizing how much energy it consumes. Some people can't even enjoy simple things anymore because part of their attention is always focused on how they're being perceived. Even when posting online, or even when texting, even during conversations with close friends, even alone. And eventually, your personality becomes more reactive than intentional. You stop asking, what do I actually want? And start asking, what version of me will be most accepted here? That's why people who constantly seek approval often feel strangely disconnected from themselves, because they've spent so long adapting that they barely hear their own preferences anymore. A simple example most people overlook is how often they say they don't care where they eat, what movie they watch, what plans they make, or what they actually want to do. Not because they truly don't care, but because they've trained themselves to minimize friction. That sounds harmless at first, but repeated for years, it slowly teaches your brain something dangerous. Your preferences are less important than keeping people comfortable. And once that pattern spreads into bigger areas of life, career choices, relationships, lifestyle decisions, boundaries, people start building entire lives they don't even deeply want. That's why some people wake up in their 30s or 40s feeling confused about why they feel empty despite doing everything right. They weren't building a life based on alignment. They were building one based on approval. And there's a major psychological reason this happens. Why approval feels addictive. Your brain is constantly trying to avoid social rejection, not because you're broken, because humans evolved socially. For most of human history, exclusion from the group could genuinely threaten survival, so your brain still treats social acceptance like something deeply important. That's why criticism can feel physically uncomfortable, why embarrassment feels intense, why rejection can replay in your mind for hours. Your nervous system reacts socially before it reacts logically. But modern life exaggerates this problem, especially social media, because now people aren't just worried about rejection from their tribe. They're worried about rejection from everyone. Likes, views, replies, validation, attention, approval, social positioning. People slowly start building identity through external reactions instead of internal stability. And once that happens, confidence becomes extremely fragile. Because now your emotional state depends on other people cooperating with your self-image. If people praise you, you feel valuable. If they ignore you, you feel insecure. If they disagree with you, you feel threatened. That's not confidence. That's emotional outsourcing. And the worst part is that many high-functioning people live like this without realizing it. Some people become successful while still being deeply controlled by approval. They choose careers their family respects. They hide opinions to avoid tension. They over-explain themselves constantly. They feel guilty resting. They apologize excessively. They struggle to say no. They fear disappointing people more than disappointing themselves. And eventually, their entire life becomes negotiation, not expression, negotiation. One of the clearest signs this is happening is something most people never notice. The real reason. You overthink everything. Overthinking is often misunderstood. People think it's just thinking too much. But a lot of overthinking is actually social prediction. You replay conversations, you analyze reactions, you imagine future judgments, you rehearse possible scenarios, you mentally prepare for criticism that hasn't even happened. Why? Because your brain is trying to protect your social image. That's why some people can spend 20 minutes rewriting a simple text message. Not because the text matters, because perception matters. And once your brain becomes heavily dependent on external approval, ordinary situations start feeling emotionally risky. This is why people who care too much about what others think often feel mentally drained all the time. Their mind is never fully resting. Part of their attention is always managing impressions, always calculating, always filtering, always adjusting. This is also why authenticity feels strangely uncomfortable at first, because honesty creates uncertainty, and uncertainty threatens approval. That's why so many people say they want to be themselves, but instantly shrink the moment disapproval appears. And honestly, this becomes painfully obvious in adulthood. You see people changing personality depending on who they're around, hiding interests they genuinely enjoy, pretending to agree with things they disagree with, laughing at jokes they don't find funny, acting more successful than they are, acting less emotional than they are, acting less intelligent than they are, acting less ambitious than they are. Not because they're fake people, because most people are terrified of social rejection. But eventually, constantly shaping yourself around other people creates a deeper problem most people don't expect. You start losing self-trust. How people lose the ability to trust themselves. Self-trust isn't built through affirmations. It's built through evidence. Your brain watches your behavior and forms conclusions from it. So when you constantly ignore your own needs, silence your own opinions, tolerate things you hate, avoid boundaries, and betray your instincts just to maintain approval, your brain notices. And it slowly concludes, we don't protect ourselves. Our feelings don't matter. We can't fully trust our own decisions. Other people's reactions are more important than our truth. That's why chronic people-pleasing often creates anxiety, not just because of stress, but because your internal system no longer feels stable. You become disconnected from your own authority. And once that happens, even small decisions become harder. You second-guess yourself constantly. You look outside yourself for reassurance. You need permission before acting. You fear making the wrong choice. You fear upsetting people. You fear being misunderstood. And what makes this worse is that many people are rewarded for this behavior early in life, especially kids who were praised mainly for being easy, good, mature, or well-behaved. A lot of adults still unconsciously associate love with compliance. They learned, if I upset people, I risk losing connection. If I disappoint people, I become less lovable. If I prioritize myself, I'm selfish. So they grow into adults who feel guilty for basic self-respect. And this creates one of the most dangerous habits of all, living reactively instead of intentionally, which is exactly where most people quietly lose years of their life. The trap of living reactively. A reactive life feels busy, but not meaningful. You spend years responding instead of choosing, responding to expectations, responding to trends, responding to pressure, responding to family opinions, responding to social comparison, responding to fear. And because the decisions are externally driven, people often end up deeply disconnected from what they actually want. This is why some people feel strangely numb after reaching goals they worked toward for years. Because sometimes the goal wasn't truly theirs. It was inherited, absorbed, expected. And one of the hardest realizations adults experience is recognizing how much of their identity was unconsciously built around avoiding criticism instead of pursuing genuine alignment. That realization hurts, but it's also where freedom starts. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you stop automatically obeying it. And there's one specific shift that changes everything. Most people think freedom means nobody judging you anymore. That never happens. Real freedom is becoming less controlled by judgment. That's a completely different thing. Why being yourself feels so uncomfortable at first. A lot of people secretly expect authenticity to feel empowering immediately, but usually it feels terrifying first. Because if you've spent years shaping yourself around approval, then honesty feels emotionally unsafe. Saying what you actually think feels risky. Setting boundaries feels rude. Disagreeing feels aggressive. Choosing yourself feels selfish. Disappointing people feels dangerous. Not logically, emotionally. That's why people often relapse back into old patterns even after realizing they're unhealthy. The behavior isn't just a habit, it's protection. Your brain learned keeping people happy keeps us safe. So when you stop automatically pleasing people, your nervous system can react as if you're doing something wrong, even when you're finally doing something healthy. This is important to understand because otherwise people misinterpret discomfort as failure. They think, maybe I'm becoming cold. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should just go back to how I was. But often what's actually happening is this. Your identity is changing faster than your nervous system can process. That gap feels uncomfortable. And honestly, one of the hardest parts of becoming mentally independent is learning to tolerate temporary disapproval without immediately abandoning yourself. Because most people don't realize how quickly they self-correct around other people. Someone gives a weird reaction and instantly you want to soften your opinion. Explain yourself more. Make your tone gentler. Add unnecessary apologies. Backtrack your statement. Laugh awkwardly. Pretend you were joking. Not because your original thought was wrong, because your brain detected social tension. This is why confidence is less about feeling fearless and more about recovering slower from social discomfort. People who seem emotionally grounded still feel awkwardness, rejection, and embarrassment. They just don't instantly reshape themselves because of it. That's the difference. Why so many people fear being alone with themselves. A lot of people stay constantly distracted because silence exposes disconnection. When there's no noise, no notifications, no entertainment, no validation, no social interaction, they're left alone with themselves. And many people realize they don't actually know themselves very well. Their identity became heavily built around roles, expectations, routines, performance, and external reactions. That's why solitude feels uncomfortable initially. Not because being alone is bad, because stillness removes distraction. And honestly, this is where many people finally notice how much of their behavior is externally driven. The clothes they wear, the goals they chase, the opinions they repeat, the lifestyles they admire, the personalities they imitate. A huge percentage of modern behavior is socially copied. That doesn't mean individuality means rejecting society completely. That's unrealistic. But healthy individuality means developing enough self-awareness to distinguish between what I genuinely value and what I absorbed automatically. That process takes time, because most people inherited large parts of their identity unconsciously, and this is where something important happens. When you stop constantly adapting yourself around other people, you finally create space to discover who you actually are, not who performs best socially, not who gets the most approval, not who feels safest, who you genuinely are. That's a completely different process. How to start rebuilding your real identity. A lot of people ask, okay, but how do I actually stop caring what people think? The honest answer is, you probably never stop caring completely. Humans are social. Opinions will always affect you somewhat. The goal isn't emotional numbness, the goal is reducing control. You stop allowing external reactions to dictate your identity, decisions, emotions, and behavior constantly. And that happens gradually through small, repeated actions. One of the most effective starting points is paying attention to moments where you automatically self-edit. Those moments reveal everything. Notice when you pretend to agree, hide preferences, laugh artificially, over-explain, apologize unnecessarily, downplay yourself, avoid honesty, change personality depending on the room. Don't judge yourself for it, just notice it. Awareness comes first, then start making tiny corrections. Express one honest opinion. Say no once without a long explanation. Choose something based on your preference instead of automatic accommodation. Wear something you genuinely like. Post less performatively online. Stop rehearsing every sentence mentally before speaking. Small acts matter because identity changes through repetition, not through one dramatic moment. And something interesting happens once you start becoming more authentic. Your life simplifies. There's less emotional management, less pretending, less overthinking, less impression control, less anxiety about maintaining an image. You stop splitting yourself into different versions for different people, and mentally that creates enormous relief, because performance is exhausting. But authenticity, while initially uncomfortable, is sustainable. That's the difference. The real cost of living for other people. People often underestimate how expensive chronic approval seeking becomes over years. It affects careers, relationships, creativity, confidence, mental health, decision making, identity. Some people spend decades postponing their real life because they're waiting for universal approval first. But approval is a moving target. No matter what you do, someone will disagree. Someone will misunderstand, someone will judge, someone will dislike your choices. That's unavoidable. And once you fully accept that, something shifts psychologically. You stop trying to build a perfectly approved life and start building an honest one. That doesn't mean becoming reckless or inconsiderate. It means finally allowing your own values, preferences, instincts, and priorities to matter too. Because at the end of the day, constantly betraying yourself to maintain acceptance creates a very specific kind of regret. The regret of realizing you were present in your own life, but not fully living it. And honestly, that realization hits people hard later in life. Not because they failed, because they adapted too much. They became who they thought they needed to be instead of discovering who they actually were. And the difficult truth is this: the longer you live mainly for approval, the harder it becomes to hear your own voice clearly. That's why learning to reclaim it matters now, not someday. Now. If this video felt uncomfortably accurate at times, that's probably because a lot of these patterns are incredibly common but rarely explained clearly. Most people don't realize how much of their stress, overthinking, exhaustion, anxiety, and identity confusion comes from constantly managing perception and chasing approval without even noticing it. And the goal isn't to stop caring about people completely. The goal is to stop abandoning yourself in the process. If you found this video genuinely useful, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, Simple Ways of Life, because that tells me these kinds of honest, deeply practical conversations are actually helping people. And if you want to continue this idea further, watch the next video. Life is short, spend it wisely. Because a lot of people don't realize how much time disappears while they're busy living according to expectations they never consciously chose.